Hi, I'm Tom Burgess and welcome to the Weekly Wake Up. We hope we'll help you wake up to what's really happening in our country and think about what we can do to make positive change happen. Now, this show's part of the Real Agenda network of podcasts for political change. And today, we're talking about football. Not about the very exciting Women's World Cup, but how it could contribute to urban resurgence as a route to tackling inequality. Or can it? And also about the plight of disabled people living in poverty. And also the ethnicity pay gap, and on the other end of the scale, how entrepreneurs extract huge sums while their workers are struggling. That's all in today's show. If you want to find out more about the Real Agenda, go to our website, realagendaradio.org. And we had another 5-star review last week. The hopeful note said, change will happen, so follow the Real Agenda to find out more. I don't think it was any of us that posted it, was it?
Wasn't me.
Wasn't you?
Not me.
No. Very good. Well, thank you very much for that post. The plan for this show is that each member of our team will introduce a topical news event or media item, something that's happened in the last week or so, which is related to the Real Agenda. Now, that's inequality, low incomes, unaffordable housing, climate emergency, public services, infrastructure, and the repairing of our damaged democracy, as these things are the things that really matter. And we'll talk about these topics with a particular focus on how these issues can be fixed. So let's introduce the team. Satya, how are you doing today?
Tom, I'm really, really good.
What are you going to talk about today?
I'm going to talk about disability and people who are disabled living in poverty. There's a report that talks about both economic deprivation and social deprivation.
We look forward to that. And now, Oliver, I just want to ask Oliver, what's for supper? Why am I asking you that? Because you've got a supper club. Tell us about that.
A Caribbean supper club.
Very good. Yes, I've been to one of your events. What's the latest?
So the latest, actually, we're taking a short break for the summer and gearing up on coming back in September with a bang for a scintillating menu of Caribbean foods. So watch this space.
Well, we look forward to that as well. What are you going to highlight for us for the Real Agenda today?
Well, today, Tom, I'm going to be talking about Liverpool, the city Liverpool, which has had a resurgence in its economic fortunes, which just happens to coincide with the resurgence of Liverpool football team winning the Champions League a few weeks ago, actually. Yeah, it's an example of Liverpool could be used to be rolled out throughout the UK as a way to combat inequality in terms of government coming together with corporations and the community.
And our man of many tongues and languages, Hugh, what's your topic today?
Well, Tom, I'm going to be discussing the new report from the Office for National Statistics, ONS, their new report on ethnicity pay gaps in Great Britain in 2018.
Okay, well, that's the show that we've got lined up for you, so do stay tuned to us, and we'll be talking about those in just a moment. But I did notice another thing that we're actually being chatted about on a forum, an online forum called Digital Spy. That's the entertainment, TV and film website. Now, the people posting were talking about the new radio station that's currently broadcasting, and someone said that they'd heard the Real Agenda on that radio station. Well, in fact, they are correct. But we've been asked not to mention the station name yet, as it's in setup mode, and it'll be launched in August. So watch out on those airwaves. So before we get on to the main chat, I'll just give you an update about what's been going on with the Real Agenda in the last week. Now, there was a talk at the School of Economic Science on the Green New Deal with Anne Pettifer, who was one of the original conveners of the Green New Deal group back in 2008. She framed the current situation as Earth systems collapse. Now, this event was organised by Promoting Economic Pluralism, whose founder, Henry Lewson Gore, featured in this week's Real Agenda episode 44, called in Rethinking Economics, Time for a Change. And just so you know, we're partnering with Henry and his team to produce a series of podcasts on new economic thinking. How are we doing so far, team? Are we still with it? You've eaten all the biscuits, Satya? We like to talk about biscuits, don't we?
Biscuits seems to be a
an
major
ongoing
theme
issue
around here.
That's right. So just a quick one about the fair tax mark. I went along to that this week and did actually get to meet Julian Richer, the founder and CEO of the hi-fi retailer Richer Sounds, who was speaking there. And he's clearly someone that wants to campaign more on these tax justice issues. And we've agreed to talk with Julian on this in a future episode of The Real Agenda. Now, here's something that I'm sure you'll all have something to say on. There was an event organised by Quality Trust and My Fair London on carbon inequality, and it was held at the Toynbee Hall in London, in the very room where the social reformer William Beveridge...
Wasn't Beveridge the NHS?
Yeah.
Yeah, the NHS
Yeah.
guy.
So he talked to her in this very room. It was a debating chamber. And also, apparently, this Toynbee Hall was visited by Lenin. That's Vladimir Lenin, not Lennon and McCartney. But the key point, apart from showing how the wealthy pollute more, it was about why we're not making any progress. For instance, we have a Climate Change Act, 2008, which sets out the action. And then the government set up an oil and gas authority whose principal objective was taking out all of Britain's oil and gas resources.
Quite interesting. There was a piece actually on the news last week about whether oil companies should be funding the arts.
But
the
Shell,
arts.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it was on Politics Live, wasn't it?
Yeah, because I think there's a petition that some of the artists they asked them to withdraw their funding for some of the arts programs, basically.
I really can't see how a company who is funding the arts, unless it's doing something absolutely horrendous, can't associate itself with an artist. It's better than doing nothing, isn't it?
What people were saying, we have been made so aware of the issues here now. If we stand by and say it's okay to let those companies, they are doing so much damage to the environment that we cannot let them support us, because that means we're turning a blind eye to the damage that they're doing to the planet. It's where your values lie and what ethically you can or cannot accept.
I don't know if you noticed after the political debate this week between Hunt and Johnson.
Oh, was that a debate?
So, well, the debate, the argument.
A debate. That wasn't a debate.
Well, I didn't actually watch it, but I did hear about the last question that were asked of them about what do you admire most about each other, and they struggled to come up with an answer.
It was pathetic. It was pathetic. But my point is,
moving on.
During that programme, there was an ad in the middle. It was for BP. How BP, they're trying to promote their electric offering. They're trying to put electric stations within their petrol stations.
They would argue, I mean, those sorts of companies would argue that they're doing whatever they can to actually do as little damage as possible. But the very fact of the work that they do, it does cause damage.
If it wasn't Shell or BP or one of the big oil companies, who would it be?
You've got to act really quickly. I mean, this is another point that the speaker was making, was that it was the wealthy that polluted more per head.
I think the key issue here is that our planet is dying. We have done so much damage to it. It's time to stop and really take stock and do something differently. And we are going to have some pain to do that, but we have no choice. We have to do it.
It's clearly individual, though, isn't it? I mean, last week we were talking about war on plastics and that documentary. Everyone needs to look at their own life. David Attenborough was in front of the Common Select Committee the other week. He was saying we all need to reflect on what we're doing individually.
Business travel is huge. And in this day and age, when you've got all the technology at our fingertips, we don't need to travel that much.
No,
or less so, in fact. Yeah, that's a key point.
What did you guys think about Boris Johnson's hesitation
You're
on the third runway?
In less than
No,
20
that's
minutes.
not
This is
on.
not
Twice in one show. Twice
I
in
think
one
he's
show.
worked the Johnson campaign. Get him off.
Okay. Well, what about Hunt when he was he for or against the third runway in Heathrow? Because that's another big
No,
issue,
Hunt was
isn't it?
very clear. He said, yes, we need it. It's going to help us.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
But that's also something that's just going to increase air pollution. So how...
We've got some hard choices to make. I think, and it is going to make a difference to our lives, but we do need to act quickly, find new ways and implement them. And, so are you talking out of class, Satya? Did you want to add something? You talk to
I didn't say a word.
You talk to teacher if you want to say something. You don't mumble to them. Anyway.
We will talk about him later.
Offline.
Coming back to the crucial issue of climate change. So there we go. So that was what was happening there. I want to mention also about Compassion in Politics, who organised a round table discussion with 15 people, of which I was one, and we firmed up some really positive ideas for the Compassion in Politics campaign. So you'll be hearing more about that. And there's also an open letter from the Fight Inequality Alliance, which is a global group, an open letter, but it's particularly just been put out now because it's the UN's high-level political forum right now. And the letter expresses our vision for a radical change and is signed by over 100 organisations and movements around the world, including the Reverend Paul Nicholson, founder of Taxpayers Against Poverty, as well as myself. So we're certainly keen to push that. Okay, well, let's get on with the talking. Satya, you're here to kick off.
Oh, yes, I'm looking at this report by the New Policy Institute, and it's called Disability and Poverty. And some of their key findings are these, that 3.9 million people that live in poverty in the UK and that are disabled. So that's 28% of all the people who live in poverty are disabled. But then there's a further 2.7 million people who live in a household with a disabled person. And that means that nearly half of the poverty in the UK is directly associated with disability. And they say that 2/3 of all those people living in poverty are actually face severe deprivation. And by that, they mean that people can't actually get their very basic needs, such as food, heating, clothing, basic hygiene products, and so on. And these are things that most of us take for granted. I was quite shocked by these findings because our country is built on values, and our values are built on the notion that we help the most vulnerable in our society. And I just think the government needs to do a lot more to support the people with disabilities in the UK.
Is it just a question of more money, resources put into it? How do we get the answer?
Money is an issue. So what the report is saying is that they need to increase resources, which obviously will cost more money, but they also need to decrease costs. So help disabled people to be able to access their basic needs at a cheaper level. So maybe for certain people, they don't have to pay VAT, for example. That's just one way of reducing their costs.
It's horrendous when you think of the additional costs that having a kid with disabilities brings.
Yeah, again, in the report, it talks about disabled people that face much higher costs than non-disabled people. For example, it's some of the equipment they might need to manage their condition. The hospital visits that they have to do and the travel costs that incurs. And not only the cost issue, but many disabled people also experience social deprivation. So these are things like they're much less likely to get employment. They also are much less likely to be able to get the right training to get the skills and the capabilities to be employed in a well-paid job. So if they do get a job, it will always be, low-paid, maybe low-level jobs, maybe part-time jobs. And so the cycle of deprivation then just continues to go round.
So it's making it worse is because there are not resources put into this, and it's appears not to be a priority. I mean, I know there's a lot of people working really hard to help people in this situation, but there's just not enough resources.
And these things affect a whole family. There will be the wider relationships that are all affected by the disabilities, because they then become the carers. They then become people who they may not be able to access full-time employment.
So this is another example of where lives are being ruined, or rather than not being made
easier,
and people are not able to live a fulfilled life because we're not putting the priorities into a compassionate society to make that happen. However we do it. To Oliver, you kick off on this one.
I'm going to talk about Liverpool.
I thought you were talking about football. I thought you were kicking off about football.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, let's so we remind ourselves who won the Champions League a couple of months ago. It was Liverpool who beat Tottenham. In what was quite so basically why I mentioned this, because obviously Liverpool Town is still going on a sort of, I guess, like what you call a honeymoon period, even though it's 2 months down the line in terms of its win. Why I want to mention this sort of coincides with the city's resurgence in terms of its economic fortunes. And actually, Liverpool City has actually below the national average of unemployment, which is, given where they were, I guess, 20, 30 years ago, is quite remarkable. And one of the reasons behind this was because Michael Heseltine, back in the day, made quite a concerted effort actually to focus on that area as a regeneration area. And actually, I mean, since I think 1982, about £1.4 billion investment has gone into main shopping area. Michael Heseltine, I'm not here to plug Michael Heseltine, actually, I'll have to point that out, but what he says has worked for the city. There are three components. It's local leadership, support from central government, and partnership with the private sector, which has really helped put that city back on a sort of, I wouldn't say level footing, because there are still deprived areas in Liverpool, and actually in particular around Liverpool Football Club itself and Everton, there's still some of the most deprived areas. But those clubs in particular actually invest in money in sort of helping, providing educational support for the kids, providing meals, providing mentoring systems. And I think, to me, this is a good example which can be rolled out in the wider country.
Well, you're talking about the football clubs helping with improving the area.
Yes. Well, I'm saying they've helped the area, but I'm saying that the wider, I guess, solution in terms of what Michael Heseltine has proposed in terms of the three different parts coming together is something that could be rolled out to the country.
Because there's a different example in Tottenham, who, yes, I acknowledge that Liverpool beat in that final, but of course they've got a new stadium and they do a lot of work in the community, yes, but Tottenham Football Club want to demolish a whole load of houses, which is people in temporary accommodation, and knock down shops and so on, just to build a new walkway through from White Hart Lane, from the stadium through to White Hart Lane station. And there's a lot of excellent work being helping the people there, from the Reverend Paul Nicholson of the organisation Taxpayers Against Poverty, and there's the Love Lane Temporary Housing Group. Now, and I've also got in front of me a little booklet here called Tottenham's Trojan Horse, and it's the tale of the stadium-led regeneration in North London. And so there are other sides to this, because this is actually causing loads of problems in Tottenham for the people's lives that are being disrupted.
And the question I would ask is, who's responsible for, giving the go-ahead for that walkway?
It's the council, because they've got to give planning permission, but there's a lot of pressure from someone like the football club, and in Tottenham, they're wealthy football clubs. You can hardly afford to go and watch the matches. It's very expensive to do that. And also there's developers like Lend-Lease, who are wealthy developers. So they're all keen to do these things. The council has just to give the final sign-off. But it's people's lives, hundreds of them, who are going to be radically changed. Now, we do want to improve areas, but there's better ways of going about it.
This is what really shocks me, is that, okay, on the one hand, public and private partnerships where companies are working together with public services to actually regenerate areas, to bring more wealth into parts of the country where we really need it. That's all well and good. But then you get issues like Tottenham. But I think, isn't it part of what we're doing in compassion politics is that people needs to be at the centre of all of this, not the companies, not the people who are wealthy. It's the most vulnerable people within those areas. They need to be at the centre, and everything needs to be built around their needs.
And it can be done. It's just, it's sort of steamrolled in many ways. And I think some people have good intentions about this, and they say it's good for the area. And certainly the areas could do with improvement. But there's a story here in this booklet. This lady says, well, we live above our shops, this is small businesses as well, with our children, and completely rebuilt our garden for them. We just finished refurbishing the shop, not just a liquor paint, refurbishing everything. We had a new roof and solar panels put on. We invested our time, money, blood, sweat, tears, arguments, disputes, agreements, and we put everything into this business, and now they want to knock it down.
I think that's appalling.
Aren't they being given something else, though, in return? I mean, surely something like for like.
No. Tottenham example, there's a lot of houses, temporary housing, there in the path of this walkway. So where do people go from there? There's not enough other housing. They get either moved out of Tottenham to somewhere else in the country, as you will have seen on that Daniel Blake film, where people just get moved to somewhere completely different, which disrupts their lives, or they've got to move into the private sector, which costs them 3 times as much rent, which they can't afford, and therefore it just gets worse.
That's absolutely horrendous. You can't just move people. And I mean, fair enough. If Tottenham were going to build more houses a 2-minute walk from that pathway, fair enough. But I mean, surely that has to be one of the only solutions possible here. You can't just move, a whole. How many people
there should
are
be
there?
a stipulation when these things come up, but that actually the people around that area are protected, and that their needs are taken into account in any program that they're going to do.
I guess to balance that, the council, I think, have a very balanced act to play, because if, I guess, on the one hand, I would assume they're going to get revenue as a result of this walkway or modernisation. Also, they're very cash-strapped as well, the councils, and so I think they're a bit hamstrung by...
But on that particular point of being cash-strapped, why are they cash-strapped? Because they can't raise their own money, council tax restricted, most of the money comes from central government, and they're completely controlled. And we had that example the other day with the City of Manchester. They're having to put budgets aside to help people in austerity, which has been proactive policies from the current government. And yet that is even being cut. So we're actually paying out more, trying to cut money, but we're actually paying out more.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be held to ransom by companies. I think councils can be strong. I think because if a company wants to make something happen, they're doing it because there's a benefit to them. I think the councils have a lot more power than they actually exercise. I used to work in local government, so I know a little bit about it. And I think we just got to get stronger with this.
Well, we have, and I think, I think the particular example in Tottenham with Haringey Council, they are listening, and the Reverend Paul Nicholson of Taxpayers Against Poverty, and if you want to find any more, go to the taxpayersagainstpoverty.org.uk website, but and also this booklet, Tottenham's Trojan Horse. But this is just another example. It's not that people aren't, concerned, or the council isn't concerned. It's been, it's just making matters worse with the way they handle it. They can't just do it, we need the money.
And I think it is about relationship again, actually. It's people working together, and I'm sure there has been consultations, but I think it's a better working relationships across all parties involved as well.
And it's certainly something we need to pay attention to.
And I do agree with you, Oliver, but because it's a good thing. If we can get it right, it's a good thing that public and private work together to do good for communities. That's what it's got to be about.
Hugh, you had a quick thing you wanted to tell us about.
Yes, I do, Tom. It's the ethnicity pay gaps in Great Britain in 2018. So I had a very quick browse of the new report from the Office of National Statistics. Now, they're looking at ethnicity pay gaps in Great Britain. The report presents the first analysis of ethnicity pay gaps in Great Britain using earnings data from the annual population survey. The analysis by the ONS shows significant gaps remaining even when education and occupation are taken into account, so particularly for those born outside of the UK. This is one of the highlights in the report. London, which has the highest proportion of people classified as being in an ethnic minority group, had the largest pay gap between white and ethnic minority groups, with 21.7% difference. The Resolution Foundation has previously calculated that Britain's 1.9 million black, Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi employees are experiencing an annual pay penalty of £3.2 billion, which is absolutely massive.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot. I think there's significant progress has been made on shining light on gender pay gaps with firms through equal pay audits. The government, however, I think should now extend this to look at pay gaps for BA/ME workers too.
We really do need to look at it. Some of the work that I did in terms of diversity and inclusion looked at the gender pay gap and also the ethnicity pay gap. And in my experience, if you're a black woman, you're far more likely to experience pay penalty than any other group. We've been looking at gender pay and the inequality of gender pay for many, many, many years. the legislation came out in the 70s and we're still talking about it. I think it's only in the last 5 to 10 years that we've started to take it seriously, and we've learnt some lessons. So I'm hoping that we can move the ethnicity pay gap a bit faster than that.
This is one of the things that actually doesn't require the government or on our behalf to spend more money on. It just requires some legislation, guidelines or whatever to put the pay levels right, which some of it is going to be people in the public sector, but a lot of it is private sector. We could have legislation, this is the way you're going to do it.
A lot of it is unconscious bias. So, for example, many companies may not even know, but subconsciously they tend to pay ethnic minorities less. It's a deep-rooted cultural prejudice that needs to be tackled, and a lot of it is about education.
It's awareness, isn't it? Last year, I think Theresa May mentioned the possibility of implementing mandatory reporting on ethnic pay gaps.
But Satya, did you find in your experience that these statistics, just a sort of result of the underlying problem we have to tackle around inequality within the workforce and elsewhere? Because for me, the ethnic pay gap, the gender pay gap, if we can get to the bottom of addressing, you say, the unconscious bias and the other factors that lead to these statistics, isn't that the crux of the issue?
Oh, absolutely. So if you just look at the BBC has been one of the widest publicised areas where they've kind of looked at the gender pay gap. Now, you wouldn't say that openly the BBC is discriminating against women. And yet, when they did the review, they found a large majority of the women were being paid a lot less than the men. And where did that come from? It came from unconscious bias. They didn't set out to discriminate against women, but it happened. And it is about really getting to the crux of the issue and looking at how we unknowingly discriminate against other groups.
How can someone that is suffering that pay gap anomaly go about discussing it with their employer? It's a very hard conversation to have with your boss if you say, well, I want to be paid more because my other white colleagues are being paid more than I am.
You're right,
how do you go about that?
Hugh. It's a very, very, very difficult conversation to have, and it shouldn't be up to the individual to do it. No. Companies should look at this, and actually I think the government has got a big responsibility around this. And the way that we've done it with the gender pay gap, I think we need to do it in a similar way, by shining a light on it, by educating people, and about saying this is not acceptable.
But can we do it in exactly the same way? Because I recall from my working actually at previous companies that there are different recording of sort of male, female, your gender compared to ethnicity is actually, there's quite different challenges.
If you do a pay audit like you would do on a gender pay, if you do it in a similar way for ethnicity, it would very clearly or very quickly show us where the gaps are. And so I think that's the starting point. So you've got to do it through actually the data, start with the data first, and then look at, because it gets very emotional. These things are very emotional, but actually it's all about numbers at the end of the day.
Can I just finish on a positive note, a slightly positive note here? So the Employment Minister, Alok Sharma, said the statistics for under 30s suggested generationally we are moving on in the right direction. Alok also added that we need to stamp out all employment inequality. That is why we continue to challenge employers to explain or change the disadvantages highlighted in our race disparity audit.
Just on that, Hugh, I for one don't want to wait a whole generation. I want it done now.
Absolutely. Okay, everybody.
We all agree.
As I said, there's lots of very important conversations here which we could talk about for a long time, and we look forward to maybe some of you listening will feedback your thoughts to us too. But just before we go, here's a sort of interesting stat which came out from The Guardian in the 2nd of July about wealth. In fact, lots of it. There was a story about the Uber co-founder Garrett Camp, who bought a Beverly Hills mansion for $72.5 million.
Outrageous.
Anyway, I worked out, based on the market capitalization or the value of Uber, which is 74 billion currently. So given there are 3.9 million Uber drivers in the world, then each driver has created $20,000 of value on average. And to buy the mansion of 72 million, each driver contributed $18. Now, this is particularly crazy as Uber makes a loss, but has a very high value, as we said, of 74 billion at the moment. And there was a quote in there, this is a perfect example of the 1% stealing from the rest of us. And that's Nicole Moore, who is actually a rideshare driver in Los Angeles. And she said of Camp's 72.5 million purchase, she said, drivers are living in their cars. We're fighting for fair wages. At least share that wealth with the people who actually built your company. So what do you think about that?
Sharing is caring. I think they should share.
I think I might have some homework for you here, Tom. Next week, do you think you could have a little look at how much money I have invested by buying a new Dyson Hoover when James Dyson has just bought a $44 million flat in Singapore?
Well, there you go.
I think I might just take my Hoover back.
You see that example, Dyson, I know, he's invested a hell of a lot of money in the UK, aside from his research and development. And I don't know what Uber's done, but I think, again, it's come back to one of the points that Satya has made, in that there's nothing wrong with companies earning money as long as, one, they're compassionate about it and they're actually doing stuff maybe over and beyond, just making economic profit and putting it back into the community or the wider community as such.
Well, it's sharing the wealth. The people are creating the wealth in those companies, in Dyson or Uber or whatever, and it's not being shared with them. And yet someone can, they set the company up, but they extract 72 million to buy themselves a ridiculously sized house.
Or $44 million to buy the most expensive flat in Singapore.
Well, there you go.
And I still scream about Brexit, how it's good.
Okay. Well,
wasn't he a Brexiteer?
Just a bit.
That's the show. We hope you've enjoyed the show this week, and we have helped to inform, involve, and inspire you into action. So you can email us at info@realagendaradio.org or look at our website at realagendaradio.org. And special thanks to our sponsors, Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. So one thing is certain, people want to see change for a more compassionate and just society, as well as more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for the people over party. It's urgent, and it's up to us to make it happen. That's The Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess.
I'm Satya Kartara.
I'm Oliver Williams.
I'm Hugh Clark.
Thank you very much indeed for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.